Good morning all. So today we will discuss about building an API, and in our previous sessions we have discussed designing an API from Anypoint Design Center. We have created a API specification and also performed a mock testing, and we have enhanced the API specification for reusing and organizing it as a folders and created files for types, resource types, and also for examples, and we were referring them within the main API specification. And we have published the API specification to Exchange, and also we have reviewed the API, and you can also update the documentation. This part we have not done. You can add the points so that it will be more helpful for the others. And we have also performed the mock testing, and we have published the API as a private asset, and we have done private portal testing within the Anypoint Exchange. And also we have shared the assets to public, and we have also accessed the API from public portal without logging into Anypoint platform. And we have shared the assets with external organization by adding a external access with a organization domain. So our API specification must be more reliant and more understandable for others. That is the reason we have to design our API and provide the documentation, and also we can share that. And in that way, anybody wanted to consume the service, they can be aware of what are the resources that are available and what are the types we need to send, or what will be the responses that we will receive from the services. And also that is the reason first we have to design our APIs before we start the actual implementation. And today we will mainly concentrate on the building the API or implementation of APIs. We are going to download the RAML into Anypoint Studio. We will create a new project and we will review what are the default flows, and then we will update our existing project with this RAML, and then we are going to implement or enhance the existing services. And then we have to link our API interfaces flows to the implementation flows. So in generally, first we will create a new project from the RAML, and then we will do the actual implementation of the services. But since we have already working on the API's implementation, we have created a suppliers API, so we are going to make use of that existing suppliers API project in Anypoint Studio, and we will update with the RAML. Go to Anypoint Studio, and within Anypoint Studio we have suppliers API, and as of now we can see that only these files are available, XML files, and in source main resources there are no API files. So I am going to download the RAML as a new project. First click on file, new, mule project, and here we need to provide a API name project. Provide the API name, so HBT suppliers API, and here we have an option to import a published API or to import the RAML, and we can import the RAML from Design Center. So import RAML from local file is something we have to download the RAML from Anypoint Design Center to our local machine, and then we can refer that file. Now we are directly going to refer the RAML from Design Center. Click on this option and choose a location. We need to log into Anypoint platform. Now once we are logged into the account, it will show you what are the users or accounts that we have configured within the Anypoint Studio, and it will also list down what are the different business groups that are available, and we can select that particular business group from which business group we wanted to download the RAML. And here you can search if there are multiple projects or RAMLs, then we can search for a specific project. Since we have only one, select that project and click on OK. Now click on finish. Once the project is created, you can go to source main resources, and within source main resources we can see that there are API folders created with different folder structures. One is with HBT suppliers API RAML. So this RAML is nothing but our Anypoint Design Center RAML that we have created, and it is going to refer multiple files, and since we are referring multiple files, we have to download those files along with the main RAML, and that is the reason we can see different folder structures and different files that are downloaded into Anypoint Studio, and we can see trades, resource types, libraries and examples. Now we will refer the HBT suppliers API.xml file, which was created by default whenever we have downloaded the RAML. So by defaultly, whenever we download the RAML and created a new project, it is going to create these files like HBT suppliers API main, and within these we can see there is a HTTP listener, and this HTTP listener will have a default HTTP configuration, and it is going to refer the host name 000 and port number 8081, and it also created one router configuration. So this router configuration is going to be referred by RAML specification that we have created, and also if we wanted any mappings to the services or resources, we need to map it if we want any manual mapping. Otherwise it is going to create a automatic mapping, and then it will create the flows for the resources and methods that we have created in RAML file. So click on OK and go to message flows. So the flows are going to be starting with API/star. That means all the flows that we wanted to execute or test from Postman, or if we wanted to share with other consumer applications, it is going to be referred with the resources like /API and then actual resource name. We have created 4 methods in the RAML. One is to get the suppliers information. Here we can see that there is a get and then suppliers resource and the HBT suppliers API config. So this API config is nothing but a router configuration, and this flow is going to refer the get method within the HBT suppliers router configuration for the suppliers resource. And here we can see that there is a example that we have added within the RAML. It is being referred within the transform message and assigned to a payload. So in this way it is going to create as many flows as we have created for each resource and methods. So if we observe, it has created a post suppliers method, and also we are referring it by using the application JSON as a response, because this is a post method and we need to send a payload, so it has to refer with the media type as well. And we will see the transform message here. Here we can see the example that we were referring for post supplier once the flow is executed successfully. And we will refer other methods. Another method we have added under suppliers supplier number, and it is referring a application JSON media type that we need to send for this flow as an input request, and it is referring HBT suppliers API config, and method is patch. If there are any parameters, query parameters or URI parameters, then we need to refer them by using the attributes, and it is a URI parameter, so URI params supplier number, and this supplier is part of the URI. If we observe here, there is a suppliers and then supplier number. This supplier number is going to be referred by using the supplier number URI parameter. and this is the response that will be sent once the flow is executed successfully. And there is one more method under supplier number, and that method is a delete, and we do not have any request for this method, so it is not going to add any of the media type, and it is referring the HPT suppliers API config. In this way, it is going to create the flows based on the resource methods and the media type, and we will observe the other flows that are created. So there is one more flow created for HBT suppliers API console. So this API console, we will verify what is it going to return. So API console is going to refer with the resource console and then star, and it is referring the HTTP listener config. So we have to invoke the service by using 8081 port, and then here we have a API kit console. So this API kit console is going to refer the configuration HPT suppliers API config. I'm going to open, and this HPT suppliers API config is nothing but our router configuration. So whenever we are going to consume the console resource, then it is going to provide the information like what are the available resources for it. And also here we can see that it is going to add default error handling on error propagate, and it added a API kit not found error. And now we are going to verify the HPT suppliers main flow. So within this main flow, if we observe, it is throwing an error, bad request, not found error, method not allowed. So these are the default error types that will be added whenever we are going to use the RAML configuration and also API kit router. So this API kit router is going to throw the exceptions by using the API kit namespace and with different identifiers. These RAML configurations will going to add all of these API kit router exceptions, and it will handle accordingly. We will just verify one or two transform messages. So in the first transform message for API bad request, it is going to return a message like whenever this exception occurs, it returns message bad request. And for 404 not found, if the resource is not available that we are looking for, then it will throw an error resource not found exception, and it is going to return output format as JSON. And if we want to modify these response messages, then we can work on this, and we can always change the response formats, and if we wanted to add any errors, we can do that. So this is about the default flows and also the default error configurations that will be added when we download or import the RAML from Design Center to Anypoint Studio. I'm going to close this application, and now we are going to refer the RAML within the existing implementation that we had done. So we already have the suppliers API flow to fetch the details, and also we have create suppliers API flow. And for this implementation, we are going to add the API specification. So as of now, it is not referring any API specification. I am going to add the API specification for it. So right click on the API and go to Anypoint platform, and from here select an option download RAML from Design Center. And here also we have to choose the accounts and choose the project. Click on it. Here it will ask whether we want to replace the resource files within the API or not. Then click on proceed. So it is going to refresh all the files if we choose this option. So within API, as of now, there were no files, but if we wanted to perform any enhancement after the import in Anypoint Studio, then we can do that in Anypoint Design Center, and we can always come back into Anypoint Studio and we can update that. So at that point of time, it is going to replace these existing files if there are any changes in that particular files. Now if we observe, it is created the API folder structures, and raml files are there, examples, everything, as we have seen in hpt suppliers api project. Now I am going to suppliers api.xml. So within this suppliers api xml, if we observe, it is referring an http listener and it is having a suppliers as a resource, and we have the http listeners within these flows. I am going to open the hpt suppliers api.xml, and within this hpt suppliers api.xml we can see the api main flow with the api kit router configuration and the default error handlings, and also it added a console flow and all the resource and method flows: delete supplier number, patch supplier number, and get suppliers details and post supplier. We are going to run this application and we will test it from post. I am just going to verify the http listener for hpt suppliers api main flow. Okay, it is going to refer http listener config, because if we have multiple or duplicate configurations then it will throw an error, and that is the reason we need to verify before we proceed further. Save the changes and deploy the application. We have an exception: response streaming mode is not allowed to appear in element. Your application is running fine, that is fine. Otherwise, remove all the unnecessary configurations from the XML. Save the changes and then deploy the application. Actually, we can implement a new project if we are developing it from the scratch by a API design from raml. Otherwise, if we wanted to create an API specification for the existing project, then you can create an API specification and you can link the interface or API specification to existing project. Once the application is deployed, clear the console, and also we can see one more configuration like API kit consoles. So you can add the API kit console if it is not available already. Go to window and then show view. From here add a API kit console, and from here open console. So whenever you click on open console, it is going to open it in browser, and here we can verify that it is having an API specification and running the API services on localhost 8081, and it is having a resource name starting with API, and we are going to verify the API endpoints here, and also we can check all the types available. We have API endpoints, get suppliers, post suppliers, and patch means update suppliers information under suppliers / supplier number, and it is a URI parameter, and we have delete supplier as well. Let us verify one service, and whenever we are going to add the information for get method, it is having an information with get method and also API / suppliers as a resource, and here you can verify the service and we can do this. So in this way API console will be helpful to return the services whenever we are testing from locally, and also it will be helpful for other consumer applications. Now try to send a request here, status active, and okay, here we have client ID and client secret as mandatory. Just pass the values 1 2 and send a request. So if we observe, it is returning a response which is added as an example. We will test the same service from our postman. So go to postman, and from postman request for the suppliers information which is having API/suppliers as a resource and send a request. So whenever we are sending a request, it is throwing an bad. So whenever we are sending a request, it is throwing an bad request errors. We have to check the information in the console, and we can see what are the mandatory parameters here. So we have a mandatory query parameter status and also mandatory headers. So we need to send this information from postman. So add client ID and client secret. And also query parameter status. Send a request, and we can see that it is returning an information from the example. So go to Anypoint Studio and clear the console, and from here we also have actual implementation of the services. So instead of accessing it from the API/suppliers, send a request directly with suppliers resource, and I am going to copy this information and removing the API resource from URI path. Now send a request to this resource, and within this get suppliers information, we are having a information that is returning supplier number and supplier name from the actual service, or this is the actual data. And instead of getting this data, we were getting a different information which is added as example. That is one difference. And also whenever we are sending a request without the status or these parameters headers, then we are getting a bad request error. That means it is going to validate the information before it sends an request to the flow, and it is throwing an error. So it is going to validate the request against the RAML configuration, since our HTTP listener in the API, since our HTTP listener for the API resource is going to listen on the router kit configurations. That we will just verify. Yeah, here we have HTTP listener starting with API. So after API we can provide any of the resource name here, and it is going to validate against the API kit router configuration of the RAML, and then it is going to perform the check, and it will throw an error if it is not available. I am going to provide the resource name as suppliers details. So let us assume that this is a resource. Send and request. So whenever we are sending a request with supplier details, it is saying the resource is not found. That means it is going to validate the request against the API kit RAML, and then it will throw an error if the resource is not available. If the resource is available, then it is going to check for the other information like traits information, metadata information, or it can verify the type information. Like if it is a post request and it needs a payload, then it is going to verify against the payload as well. In this way we can make sure our API specification is validating all the incoming requests, and then it will route the request to the actual implementation of services. And let us assume that it is a valid request and send a request, but instead of returning the actual response which is a suppliers information, it is returning a dummy response. So we have to make a link to the API specification flows and also the actual implementation flows. That we will do it. Anypoint Studio, close all the flows. It is suppliers API.xml as interface file. So API interface. Refactor or rename the suppliers API XML as implementation. So implementation XML, and go to interface XML, and here we have our interface flows which are going to be referred with for deleting of suppliers information and updating the supplier information. We have not yet implemented the services or flows, so we are going to leave as it is. And for the get suppliers flow, I am going to remove the transform message here, and go to mule palette and refer a flow reference. So for this get suppliers information, there is already an existing flow which is going to return the suppliers information. So the flow name is suppliers API flow. Refer suppliers API flow in the get suppliers flow. So whenever we receive a request to get suppliers flow, it is going to make a request to this suppliers API flow and it will fetch the information. And we are going to perform the same activity in post suppliers flow as well. So remove this information and use a flow reference. For suppliers flow, just verify the flow name here. It is a post suppliers API flow. And now we are no longer needing to expose these services by using a different resource. And now we don't need to expose these flows as a service, and we can remove these source endpoints. So instead of directly accessing the flows, we want to make sure that it is going to get a request from the API kit router or referring RAML API specific. Remove these listener endpoints. Save the changes. And also I am going to make one more change. Go to routers data sets, supplier subflow, and go to reference flow. And here I am going to check the information. Okay, here we have all the information. Supplier number, name is active. So within this transform message, instead of returning only this supplier number and supplier name, I want to return all the information. So refer it as payload itself. Okay. And also we were sending a information like status information. So whenever we send this status active, then we need to receive only active suppliers. So for that, add a filter condition, filter dollar dot is active. So is active equal to vars dot status. So we will create a variable, status variable. Add a default value as empty. Update this transform message. New supplier created successfully. Now deploy the changes. Application is deployed. Retest the API from Postman. So here I am going to send a status and it is returning empty response. We have new suppliers, payload dot supplier number is failing, and also here it is referring, we call the function plus plus with the arguments, it is having null values, returning an empty suppliers list. Let us verify the details. So within routers data sets flow, we have an information with active yes or no. So instead of directly comparing the values or filtering the values by using the status condition, we need to transform the value from query parameters. Like if the query parameters value is active, then we need to assign the value as yes, and if it is inactive, then we need to assign the value as no, otherwise it should be empty. Save the changes and deploy the application. Once the application is deployed, retest it. Now we can see it is returning a correct suppliers information which are of active. Let us send a inactive suppliers information. Okay, it is returning inactive suppliers information. Let us send some other value. whenever we are sending the value as not active, then it is returning empty suppliers information. So we can improve this service or by making enhancements to the API specification, like the status value, whenever the status query parameter is sent, the values must be either active or inactive instead of other values. So we will make that change. And also we are going to verify the service, like whenever the value is not sent, then also we need to get the suppliers information instead of receiving the values or response as bad request. So that is another change. So changes are: make status query parameter as optional and return all suppliers. And another one, if status query parameter is sent, then values must be active or inactive. This is another change. Now we are going to verify the other service, like we were able to get the information directly accessing the supplier's resource. Let us try to send a request now. Whenever we are going to send a request, and we can observe that it is having an information like no listener for this endpoint, since we have removed a listener from the particular flow, supplier's API flow. So I am going to make these changes in Anypoint Studio to accept the query parameters only active and inactive. Go to API, and here within API YAML we need to check for the traits. We have suppliers information, get suppliers. Our traits information is this, get suppliers. Refer the get suppliers traits, and here our get suppliers traits is referring to get suppliers traits within the traits folder. Open it, and here we need to make a change, like status is required as false. And also we are going to make this value as a list of values. That means enum values can be referred in two ways. We can add a square brackets as array of records, otherwise we can choose a dash and add the values active and inactive. Save the changes and deploy the application. Test it from Postman without sending the status query parameter. Now we are still returning the values of empty suppliers list. Let us send a request. It is returning bad request. Send a value as active. Now we can see that whenever we are sending the other information, like apart from active and inactive, then we are getting a bad request error. So that means it is validating the status values and then returning a response. Now remove this query parameter and send a request, and it is still returning a empty suppliers response. So we have a suppliers status as active, inactive condition, and whenever it is others, then it is whenever it is other value, then we are assigning a value as empty. So it is going to compare the values and it is returning the suppliers list. So instead of returning the values whenever this value is empty, we need to return the values only when it is not blank. Make a change in this transform message, making sure it is returning and applying a condition, a filter condition whenever this value is available, otherwise return all the information. Save the changes. Now send a request from Postman without query parameter, and whenever we are not sending the query parameter, we can see all the list of suppliers and whenever we are going to send a status query parameter but with different values apart from active and inactive, then we are getting a bad request. That means it is not allowed value. And we can check for the post suppliers API flow. Here change it to post and add a API before suppliers resource, and also we have to add a request body. So instead of sending a request body, send a request without a body. Whenever we are not sending a request, then we can see that it is returning an information bad request. So we have to send a request JSON and also headers. So for this information, go to console and copy the parameters for post. So we have a suppliers request and also headers as client ID and client secret. Add the values in headers. The values can be anything, client ID and client secret, but we need to just send the keys. Send a request. So whenever we are sending a request, we can see that new supplier creates successfully message is returning from the service. So let us try to remove the information like a supplier name. So whenever we are removing the required information, it is throwing a bad request error. So now we have linked our RAML API specification to the actual implementation of the services by downloading the RAML to Anypoint Studio from Anypoint Design Center and then implementing the actual services and also linked the interfaces flows to actual implementation of the services. We can directly implement all the message processors within the flow itself also, and we can make sure that it is going to perform the specific action. But instead of doing that, if we can create the flows or subflows, then we can make sure that it is reusable configurations. In this way, we can download the RAML from Anypoint Studio and we can link to the implementation or flows. Thank you.